Advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, Mark Regev. Mark, I wanted to start off with your reaction to this breaking news that a 3-year-old American child is among the hostages. That is outrageous. That is sick that Hamas would take a 3-year-old child hostage, as well as all the other children that have been taken hostage in all of this. What can you tell us about the efforts to free this child and the others?
So at the moment, Hamas is holding 239 hostages, of them some very elderly people over the age of 75, but also 32 children. Of the 32 children, the American 3-year-old that you're talking about is not the youngest. There's a 9-month-old baby. And you say quite correctly, what sort of crazy, sick people kidnap babies and infants? It really is disgusting.
It's totally outrageous. And I just wonder what is going on in these negotiations that are taking place. What will it take, do you think, to get some hostages out? There's been talk of whether or not there could be a longer pause or a ceasefire. I know that's a delicate discussion. You're worried that if you have a ceasefire, that just helps Hamas reconstitute itself. It defeats the purposes of eradicating Hamas. But what, if anything, can be done to get these children out at the very least, the elderly out at the very least?
So we've expressed a readiness to facilitate the release of our hostages by offering a ceasefire. But Jim, to be frank, we've got to understand what we're up against. I mean, we saw the sort of brutality that Hamas committed when it invaded Israel and butchered our people. We see that same brutality with the fact that they've taken these children, amongst others, hostage. They're not going to suddenly release people because they become Boy Scouts or humanitarians, Jim. They're brutal killers. And we believe the only way to expedite their release is to beef up the pressure on Hamas, the military pressure, make Hamas understand that it has no choice but to release these people. That's the way to do it, to make Hamas feel the pain. Now, there are these talks that the Qatar government is sort of involved in. Qatar has a relationship with Hamas. Qatar is hosting the leadership of Hamas in their capital, Doha. And Hamas is telling the world, well, we have a relationship with these people, and that serves the interests of the West, because that gives us influence. Now, there's a lot of criticism of Qatar. I mean, they've got a relationship with these Hamas terrorists. They wouldn't have a relationship with ISIS, I presume. They wouldn't have a relationship with Al-Qaeda, I presume. Why with Hamas? But the Qatar government says, well, we have influence. Okay, so it's time for Qatar to show it has positive influence, and let's see if it can facilitate the release of the hostages.
And is there any information about the well-being of these children, of this 3-year-old American hostage? I know the intelligence, the visibility into all of this is pretty opaque. But what, if any, information do you have on that?
So I can't be too specific other than to say we know most of the hostages are alive and that we are holding Hamas accountable for their well-being. And while we want their release, and they all have to be released immediately and unconditionally, pending that, it's time for the Red Cross to visit them. Of course, Hamas has refused Red Cross visits, which also shows us what Hamas is about. And I think the truth is, Jim, that just by keeping the pressure up on Hamas, we will get our people out. We want them all out. The Americans, the Israelis, all the other nationalities, they all should be released immediately.
Let me ask you about the Al-Shifa hospital that we've been discussing this weekend. You said Hamas is using a network of tunnels under the Al-Shifa hospital. Have you had any success in infiltrating this section of that massive tunnel network to get some sense as to what is going on with respect to those tunnels and I guess the security of that hospital?
So the story of the tunnels is no secret. I think everyone in Gaza City knows about Hamas's subterranean terror infrastructure. It's no secret. It's well known that people don't go on the record to talk about it, and that's because they fear Hamas's violent retribution. And we know it's there. We know under the Shifa hospital there's a Hamas command and control for their terror military machine. And from that command and control, there's a network of underground tunnels leading to bunkers, to arms depots, to missile launch sites, to their all parts of their war machine. We know this for a fact. And Hamas has not accidentally placed their military machine under a hospital. They've deliberately done so to shield their war machine from with human shields. The hospital is to shield their military machine. That is, of course, a war crime. That is forbidden under international law. We are being as surgical as we can. We will destroy Hamas's military structure while doing our utmost to safeguard the patients in the hospital. We've already bought fuel to the hospital to make sure they've got enough fuel to run their generators so they can the hospital continue to function. But I have to tell you, Hamas has refused the hospital staff to take the fuel that the IDF left for them.
And today, the head of a hospital in southern Gaza said more than a dozen people died after an airstrike hit a residential building there. That was just south of an area that the Israeli military had told civilians to evacuate to, according to our information. What about that? What about the safety of these hospitals? Obviously, the civilian population in Gaza, they're worried about their babies. And their babies being able to live through all of this. And this war obviously is making that exceedingly difficult. What about protecting the hospitals?
So we're making a maximum effort to protect the hospitals. And that's why we allowed fuel to go to the Shifa hospital. That's why we've offered to evacuate all the patients. And those that need evacuating in ambulances, we're ready to facilitate that as well. But Hamas is not allowing that to happen. And Hamas is using the hospital system in Gaza as part of its military machine. But Jim, do you have any illusions? We saw the sort of grotesque violence these Hamas killers are capable of when they invaded Israel and slaughtered our people, raped, murdered, burnt people alive. We saw all that. And now we see what they're doing, how they hold the babies of Gaza as human shields for their war machine. We're making every effort to safeguard those children. It's Hamas that wants them to die on the altar of its extreme and crazy ideology.
Is there any way to go into these hospitals and rescue the kids?
I think it's obviously difficult, but we're trying to be as surgical as we can be in a difficult combat situation. Ultimately, we've got our ground forces there, boots on the ground, and they can be as surgical as is humanly possible. And we're trying to, once again, we're trying to safeguard the civilians. We're trying to protect the civilians as we attack and destroy Hamas. You should know, Jim, that since we've opened up a humanitarian corridor there in the Gaza City, tens of thousands of people have left. That's in addition to the hundreds of thousands who previously left. But up until now, Hamas has been preventing civilians from leaving the combat zone. Once again, Hamas wants civilians to protect its shield its military machine. And this is the thing that has to be said, I think, Jim. In normal countries like Israel and Canada and the United States and so on, the job of the military is to protect civilians. Hamas inverts that. Hamas says we use civilians to protect our military machine. It's disgusting. It has to be condemned.
All right, Ambassador Mark Regev, thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jim.